And so we are going to cover a lot of ground with really the best experts I know in each subject. I can't wait to get started. Our first speaker will be Kevin Book. He's the managing director of Clearview Energy Partners. He's been a speaker at a number of our energy summits in the past, and so he's backed by popular demand. And Kevin's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the National Petroleum Council, and he's a senior advisor to CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies. I think Doug Arendt is a member as well, and I serve on their International Advisory Board. I never told you that, but glad to see this. So, Kevin, I'm sorry, can you just give us an overview of the state of play on gas, what's going on, the surge in new gas plants, and we'll take it from there.
I'm happy to do it. I think, let me see if I learned how to use the microphone. There we go, take two. Thanks, Clint. It's great to be here. Just a couple of reflections. Energy security's changed a lot in 20 years, hasn't it? When you think about the sea lines of communications between nations and oil production as the crisis of 20 years ago, now it's the wires and pipes within them that we're talking about for energy security purposes. In the moments when presidents start to get specific, you know you've got a problem. It was about 20 years ago, former President George W. Bush started talking about his favorite feedstock. Mine's switchgrass, he told people. What's yours? Now we have a president, although he doesn't use the terms exactly, talking about behind the meter co-location, bring your own power. I think that tells us where we are. The world has also reoriented a little bit, and we've gone from talking about CO2 as sort of the organizing principle of our generation mix to talking about getting BTUs for GPUs. And so in that context, when we have thousands of trillions of cubic feet of natural gas resource underneath our feet, maybe metaphorically, not here in Washington, D.C., you would say, well, that must be the principal answer to this moment in time, this energy security driven AI moment. 20 years ago, Clint, I believe also just to close it out, an LLM was an advanced legal education, right? And now we're talking about something else. So where are we? 42% of our generation is natural gas. And it's added 60 gigawatts of capacity, up 26% over the last decade. And during that time, capacity factor has risen by more than 3 percentage points. So we have more gas on the grid and we're using it more. And a lot of that can be attributed to coal substitution, much more than 120 gigawatts of coal off the grid in that same time, 40% reduction. Obviously, that would be the answer then. We just need more gas. What could possibly stand in the way? And of course, the value chain issues that stand in the way are well known to us all, and they include, among other things, turbines and pipelines. Other than that, everything's great. So to get to a couple of things that are going on that I think are perhaps issues on the horizon, the question of emergency intervention in the electricity sector, which, by the way, using emergency powers has happened before. The pendulum swings. Presidents learn from their predecessors. We're seeing new applications of old ideas, perhaps at greater magnitude, but things that we have seen before in some form. But 202C orders, which I know have already gotten mentioned. Currently, we've seen the retirement of 850 megawatts of gas generation over the course of the last year, and no gas 202C orders yet. But when you look at where that gas left, and most of it was in, most of it was in the form of combustion turbines, so there's that too. But some of it was in PJM, some of it was in MISO. So in places where we care about power supply at the margin and where emergency power is being deployed. We've also seen 71 facilities, more than 72 gigawatts of coal-fired generation sustained, exempted from MATS rules. And so I think one of the questions, Clint, is just to close out here and move to the next panelists and the rest of the discussion, what are we going to see from a demand perspective for gas if coal stays on the grid? Well, undercuts some of the gas demand, to be sure, but keeping coal resources alive. What are we going to see from fewer renewable resources on the grid? Well, probably, in theory, again, but for those obstacles I mentioned, more gas demand, or at least higher capacity utilization. Last thing, just to talk about where we are sort of conceptually. Gas as a solution is back in vogue in some of the Democrat-led blue states that set rather aggressive climate targets. And it's created a real politique that I think we have to sort of acknowledge that maybe those targets are long-term targets. Some of them are mid-century targets. Mid-century is a long way off still. But they're not going to be met imminently because we were in a time of flat to down load, and now we are seeing load growth, and gas at the increment is the supply source. So I think that maybe I'll stop there, and if we want to go into some of the more esoteric things like pipes for blades bargains with offshore wind, we can dig into the controversy later, Clint.
Do you want to take one moment and talk about sort of the collision that might be coming with the surge in gas plants and gas demand versus the increase in gas prices?
Yeah, I think there's no way to avoid it. So who looked at the CPI this month? Everyone celebrates CPI Day like me. For the fifth straight month, gas and power to the home comprised more than 8% of the contribution to year-on-year CPI inflation. Boy, did that sound nerdy. And after lunch, no less. But that's important for a couple of reasons. One, it's anomalous. And two, it's noticeable. And so when we look at the policy challenges that lie underneath that, the political challenges are very evident. The policy challenges may be esoteric. The politics are straightforward. Particularly, we know all presidents have always liked lower energy prices. With this one vociferously, others also. It's not new. What was true up until this month was that motor fuels disinflationary contribution to the CPI more than offset the household pocketbook impact from gas and power to the home, but no longer. The EIA, which I think we can all appreciate how difficult it is to forecast, is not alone in its projection that Henry Hub and delivered gas to utility prices are going to go from essentially where they were in the two handles in 2024 to above 5 in calendar 26 by the fourth quarter. Now, again, yeah, if you're in the upstream business, that's great news. Not everybody's excited about it from a political level or particularly going into midterm elections, as that will be happening. So this is coming. We know it's coming. The procurement of gas in the peak of the wartime spike that we saw in 2022 is part of the explanation for where we are now. A lot of that got smoothed out over the course of the years that followed. But the fact that prices haven't significantly relented and are now rising again means that there's not going to be relief in sight. The pressure is coming.
Thank you, Kevin. Beautifully done and incredibly succinct. Doug Arendt. Doug's the director of the NREL Foundation. I have the honor of serving on Doug's board together with Jeff Weiss. And Doug is regarded as a global leader for clean energy. He serves as a distinguished fellow of the World Economic Forum, and he's a senior visiting fellow at CSIS, correct? Well, I've got a few of them here. You're a member of the Energy Board of my near and dear Keystone Policy Center, Christine and Judy. And Doug will start us out with an overview. If you can give an overview of the development of renewables, where we're going, and anything else you want to stick in there, almost as succinctly as Kevin just did.
All right, tall order, and we've talked a bit about renewables before, so thank you, Clint, and Jeff also for your service and everybody else up here on the panel. We've talked a bit about renewables before, what's happening with states and their clean energy policies, some RPSs, the corporate purchasing, et cetera. So the landscape is not a cliff and demise, even if the federal situation is changing the tax credit situation quite a bit. There are other elements, and I think that the blades for pipelines actually is a really interesting conversation that we should go to, because that is a comment that I was going to make, because it actually is playing out very vividly, shall we call it. Let me provide a bit of perspective on renewables overall relative to just some comments that Kevin just made on gas. So most folks probably don't keep numbers in their head. So solar alone was nearly 50 gigawatts of new generation, not new capacity added last year in the US. The projections going forward are not going to be as robust, probably down in the 30s, 40s. Batteries are picking up if you want to consider batteries as a grid asset, not necessarily hybridized with renewables, because they do standalone, they are hybridized as well. They're going to be a fairly large growth effort as well, or continued effort. A lot of cost decreases and, frankly, abilities to manage and derive services and value from them. That's a real innovation space, which is agnostic to what type of electron goes into it, which I think we could have a good conversation about. Third piece is that wind is likely not going to have a very robust, at least near-term future in the United States, except for in states where they arbitrage gas pipelines for wind project permitting. But we can have that conversation going forward. But I think the numbers are actually pretty robust. There's another question about what happens to the residential market. So the residential market's also been in the tens of gigawatts per year. There are a couple of reflections just for those who think about the residential market as a separate segment. One, its tax credit, federal tax credit, expires at the end of this calendar year. Two, U.S. prices have always been 3 to 4 times higher than in Europe. So maybe without the tax credit, some innovation will come into the solar, residential, and battery-related markets, as well as what states might do to that. It would be really interesting to see the U.S. innovate to the point where residential, solar plus batteries, et cetera, is actually on par with what they can do in Europe, which also has high labor prices and other things as well, interestingly. And then let me stand back on a global perspective on renewables, which I think is really important. I said U.S. around 50 gigawatts of solar last year. The world, 550. Going to 600, probably around a terawatt per year of new capacity of renewables, wind, solar, batteries, hydro, et cetera, by 2030. The U.S. is a very small player in that, even though our manufacturing investments under the last administration have increased, that's still barely serving just U.S. to market. And somebody made a comment earlier about, oh, we're going to give this kind of industry leadership to China. Sorry, that train left the station about a decade ago. This is absolutely playing catch up, not just in renewable power generation, but we can go to vehicles, electric vehicles, and other things as well. So global context is there's a lot of room for actually export and growth beyond serving domestic markets if we could compete. And the domestic market is not going to jump off a cliff, but it's going to have a pretty precipitous decline going forward, but it's not going to zero. So let me stop there.
Doug, can you give an equally succinct discussion of prospects for hydrogen and then carbon capture and sequestration? Two topics we haven't really gotten into today.
Yeah, happy to do it really quickly. So hydrogen still retains some of the tax credits domestically, but the value proposition for the developers who were thinking about stacking tax credits from clean energy production plus hydrogen is now disappearing, and most hydrogen production developers are frankly pulling away from their prospect and project development in the United States. That is actually not true internationally, where there's still a robust interest in that, but it's in other markets where there's large or high quality clean energy resources, there's a conducive environment, and there's also access to pipelines and export markets. So think Morocco, Nigeria, Chile, Argentina, Bolivia even, et cetera. So very, very many other markets, but domestically, that's a pretty tall order at this stage. Carbon capture and storage, on the other hand, continues to retain robust credits here, particularly with EOR and other pieces. Interestingly, on the gas comment. If you actually do the math on natural gas combustion turbines plus CCS with a tax credit, you actually might actually move early in the electricity dispatch order if you can pull all that together and you can claim the tax credits. That would be very different kind of dynamics to look at, but that's assuming you can get a gas turbine and assuming you can get gas delivered when you need it and where you need it as well. CCS overall is in a very strong growth period globally. 200 to 600 new projects being announced, being pursued, many of them just in feasibility studies, not FID. But it continues to be a principal alternative, not alternative, a principal strategy for airlines, for petrochem companies, for oil and gas developers who want to lower their carbon footprint by doing it through CCS with the OR, et cetera. So again, we're going to see a strong play domestically with slower growth than probably what's happening internationally, but it's still a pretty robust option.
That was really nicely done. You just covered a lot of ground brilliantly, as we knew you would. I'm going to call on Carl Hauster next, and then we will shift to battery storage, and we'll conclude with Paula Glover talking about an absolutely essential aspect of our policy need. Carl's a senior fellow in the Polsky Center for Global Energy Transition at the World Resources Institute, another organization that I've been very, very deeply involved with for a very long time. Carl's one of the leading experts in the world on climate change and clean energy. I'm going to, I know you advised me to do this, I'm going to ridiculously oversimplify your introduction so we can get into the
Shorter is better.
into the topics. And can you give us an overview on clean, firm power?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Clint. And I'm going to try to start tying together some of the things we've heard today. You know, what Doug just said about CCS and hydrogen, what we heard on the last panel from Amazon and Microsoft. Above all, Molly's recommendation to us to not only have nuanced views ourselves, but to build better understanding and nuance among policymakers, stakeholders, and the public at large. First, it's kind of interesting, maybe 5 years ago, how many people could define what is clean, firm power? Didn't talk about it much. Now we're talking about it a lot. And of course, it means clean means either zero carbon electricity or very low emissions. Firm being a power source that's always there when you want it and can run as long as you need it. The candidates, of course, are hydropower, but that can't scale much beyond what we have now. Geothermal, moving ahead smartly and a lot of potential ahead. Nuclear, tapping existing plants, as well as SMRs and other advanced nuclear designs. Gas and maybe even coal with CCS, as Doug alluded to. Biomass could be a clean, firm power source, but there's concerns about scalability and competition with biodiversity and food production. And yes, if we have cheap, abundant hydrogen, we could burn that in turbines and we could have a nice balancing resource. So there's a lot of different roles that clean, firm could play. All those technologies I rattled off, they're at different stages of development and have different features. Some can run base load, ramping, or maybe it's a balancing resource. And I should also want to caution too, there's no power source that's always there whenever you need it for as long as you need it. Of course, every power plant will have forced outages, but it's very different from solar and wind. We call them variable, we call them intermittent. And the key point, of course, is that all credible modeling analysis says that the zero carbon grids that we want to get to in the next couple decades are going to require a mix of solar and wind, which has become very cheap, but needs to be complemented by some clean, firm power sources, along with expanded transmission and storage and demand-side management. And I think the nuance here, and let's keep two thoughts in our heads at the same time. We have burgeoning demand growth, and often the quickest and cheapest way to meet that is building solar and wind, and then often with the hybrid plants that Doug described. But at the same time, we need to also walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to move ahead and commercialize more clean, firm options. SMRs, gas with CCS, geothermal. Again, there are different points. Some are kind of out of the starting gate, some are not. So that's kind of an overview. And I can rattle on a little bit more, Clint, unless you have a specific question. I could talk for hours.
Why don't you give us about another 5 minutes as well done as that? But can you include in your 5 minutes the sort of cost issues surrounding solar battery storage, because there are hidden costs that aren't always discussed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The like as I alluded to, all credible analysis and modeling of the zero carbon grids that we want to get to would indicate you that you need a mix. And yet through some lenses and some advocates will say solar and wind are cheapest, end of story, why would we build anything else? And that's usually driven by very simplistic presentations of the levelized cost of electricity metric, which if you throw everything up on a chart, I can get solar for $20 or $30 a megawatt hour. Maybe I can get wind under $50 a megawatt hour. And if the discussion stops there at LCOE, then you're at a standstill, because you'll have advocates saying build nothing but solar and wind, and you'll have other people saying, wait a minute. And of course, the key is you need to look at system costs. You need complex capacity expansion models to say what is really the cheapest way to build out that next increment of demand. And that's going to depend on what's your existing infrastructure, existing fleet, what resources do you have access to, and what is that optimal combination of more solar here, some more wind there, transmission line, and a geothermal plant, and reactivating Palisades or something like that. So again, we need nuanced discussion. We need to move away from simplistic arguments based on LCOE and go deeper into the models that can guide us to the right generation mix for 2030, for 2040, and beyond. So I think I'll stop there. I know we're trying to, I'm happy to do Q&A later.
Great. You're doing a really nice job, folks, in keeping us on track. And Jeff, I know you are a man who can speak succinctly as well. Jeff is the executive chairman and co-founder of Distributed Sun and True Current. He's a highly regarded entrepreneur in many fields, but most recently in energy. He serves on the trustee council of Cornell University, and he is president of the Washington Hebrew Congregation here in Washington metropolitan area. And Jeff, as I mentioned, serves on Doug's board, numerous other boards. And I wonder if you could cover a couple of the topics we haven't yet really delved into, like microgrids, battery storage, how this will help deal with data center growth and industrial growth, and anything else that you would like to cover in a very short period of time.
All that in 60 seconds. Thank you very much, Clint, and thanks all for including me. Thank you, Clint, for including me. I'm going to start by saying something that I think even Tom Kuhn might agree with, which is that electricity is the new oil, right? So that perhaps summarizes where we are today. But I'll add, if electricity is the new oil, batteries and solar are the new silicon. So while you talked a moment ago about LCOE, the nominal factor cost, which undergirds that, is that the cost of batteries and solar have plummeted radically, and the cost of many other things haven't, and that has a dramatic impact on systems and what works and how we do it. There's a lot of conversation, whereas the grid in America was flat for 20 years, it's now growing a lot. It doesn't matter for the purpose of conversation if it has to grow over the next 10 or 15 or 20 years by 50% or by 200% or by 300%. It's going to be big, really big. As an investor, what I'll tell you is if you're a utility if you're a corporation of any type, if you have an asset base that you're depreciating over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right, and you know you have to replace it with the same asset base, you think very differently than if you have to replace it with twice the asset base. Because if you're growing a lot in your asset base, X doesn't matter. The underlying thing doesn't matter, because you get to, in the next 5 or 10 years, you get to analyze what the best combinations of technologies are. And you know what? This is actually about customers. And I'll remind everyone that Llewellyn said predictions generally don't work, so I think we should stop predicting. What I'd like to do is to, since I'm a native Washingtonian, is to baseline this, and I'm going to make this relevant in telling you what President Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, and President Trump have in common. This is going to surprise everybody. They have something in common. So Teddy Roosevelt became president at the age of 43. You all know that. He was the youngest president ever. And among many other things about him is he was an extraordinary athlete. He was an extraordinary athlete, and what he loved to do personally was to ride his horse at a gallop through Rock Creek Park, go down to the Potomac River, and swim across it, right? So even when he became president, there were people called ambassadors from other countries who were the ambassador of the United States of America, and they were in Washington. There were a lot of them. There were a lot of them. And what happened was all the countries in the world observed this description of this new young president, and they said, golly, our existing ambassadors don't fit that mold. We have to replace them. And they did that. So that is what Donald Trump and Teddy Roosevelt have in common. Oh my God. They both came in and they caused a lot of the ambassadors to be changed. So you knew I was going to fit that together somehow. But I want to underscore by saying that it actually wasn't just about Teddy Roosevelt's physical and athletic prowess. It actually was about change. It was about policy. It was about creating a new industrial policy, because Teddy Roosevelt really quickly changed a lot of things, which President Trump is also doing. So you have to lean into change, and we're in the energy industry, and some people are talking about, well, we just have to wait 3.5 years, and then all the goodness will be back. I'm not personally buying that, because I think it's about the economy, right? Others have said it's about, a long time, it's about the economy, stupid. We have to understand what's driving demand and what's driving the need for electrons, which our data center friends described much earlier. So this is a time, because of the growth of our economy and the growth of what drives the need for electrons, which are democratic and are all the same, right? But this is a time of electricity scarcity, right? We've never had that in our country before, and we have a policy regime, we have a regulatory regime, we have a permitting regime, we have a technology regime that isn't built for electricity scarcity. And as was just discussed, firm base load generation and load management need to grow to meet demand. So if storage is actually the key to firming power, we now have a series of technologies where if you're a enterprise and you're operating your own business, and you're a data center, if you're running an industrial plant, if you're someone working for their home, you can actually start to control a lot of your own destiny through what Clint describes as microgrids. And the microgrids are the combination of 2 or more sources of generation and/or storage, and storage is the complement to generation, which can extend and change, which allow you to interact with something you've never interacted with before, called the utility and the rates they charge you, on a basis more of choice than of requirement by law and by what they do for you. So from a business point of view, what we're finding in our business, in my business Distributed Sun, and my behind, which is in front of the meter, and my behind the meter business True Current, what we're finding is that we can go to actual enterprises in individual locations, because enterprises are all located somewhere. They're in a zip code. And we can analyze the combination of the policy in that micro location, the technologies that are available in that micro location, the regulatory structures that are available or required to do anything in that micro location. And all those 3 things I just said are actually very complicated. But when you do that work and do the heavy lifting, it turns out there are very positive investments that can be made, positive investments uh, um, judged by the fact that they have a great outcome to the company, to the enterprise, which are large universities, they're large industrials, they're data centers. Anyone who has a large load needs to do this. And all of a sudden, they can, at the margin, actually improve their economics, reduce their risk, and here's a surprise, save money, right? And if they can do all those things, there's a lot of money to be invested into that. So from an enterprise point of view, folks have to decrease their costs. That's something everyone wants to do, right? Lower complexity and simplify how they get electricity. Electricity for almost all businesses, including the hyperscalers who you just heard from, electricity is actually non-core. They do something else. They provide pleasing data. The industrial companies build something. Universities educate. They all have a thing that they do. But it happens everyone uses electricity, and for the first time, electricity is scarce. They have to manage it. And because electricity is the new oil, they have to figure out, with some help, and it turns out if you're inside the meter, managing that and deploying microgrids and components of microgrids is an entire strategy upon which a large amount will be invested to help through the next 5 years.
Original. And I've lived in this town a long time. I've never before understood what makes ambassadors change so frequently. It's just great.
I can't resist one follow-up question on the Teddy Roosevelt Trump thing. Did Teddy Roosevelt ever cheat at the sports that he played, or how was he?
He was fast, really fast.
We're going to continue on the theme of battery storage and move off politics with David Owens. David's a member of the board of ESPX, and Jenny Howe is, I think, the founder of ESPX. And I think about half the really smart people in this room are on your board, from what I understand. Gee, many others. Charles Yang.
I know how to leverage.
You know how to- And David was truly the beloved executive vice president at Edison Electric Institute. You can imagine what a powerful team David and Tom Kuhn were. And Mike logged some time there as well, Mike Oldak. David has served on the board of Excel. He was unselfishly the vice chair of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. He served on numerous other prestigious boards. But the thing that I admire the most about David Owens, I have watched him mentor a couple of generations of young people in the energy industry in a magnificent way. So David, you're up.
Thank you. What you forgot was I was 5 years old when I did all that mentoring. But thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to really pick up on some things that Doug was saying earlier. But we have a major crisis occurring in most regions of the United States. And that major crisis is resource adequacy. We've talked a lot about issues. We've talked around it. Significant issues. We talked briefly about the substantial increase in electricity demand, somewhat due to data centers and increased electrification. And we also said we have a supply challenge. We don't have adequate supply to meet that demand. Doug said that we've added 50 gigawatts of solar energy in the last year. I agree. He didn't say that we projected an additional 25 gigawatts this year. In addition, we have 26 gigawatts of battery energy storage that's planned. Resource adequacy. David, tell me a little bit more. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, in their long-term assessment, said, this is serious stuff that we got. We've retired a lot of baseload plants that are dispatchable, and now we're relying increasingly on inverter-based technologies, which are not dispatchable. Now, the viability and the variability of these inverter-based technologies depends on battery energy storage. So that 25 gigawatts I talked about is really necessary. But there's a problem. And the major problem is this, that we think that that nameplate of that battery is going to be the actual performance of that battery, and it isn't. And we think that the battery operator who says to the RTO, we can supply this, really can't. We got a major problem looming. And NERC identified it in its recent long-term reliability assessment. He said, we have no visibility and no control over battery energy storage. And we're an industry that's relying increasingly on battery energy storage because you can't build any new supply in a short-term period. We got a problem. So we've been focusing on that. So Prophet Jenny said, we need to find a way that we can predict battery storage capability. She said, well, you know, state of charge is important. But the state of charge that we see from the battery operator and from the nameplate are very different than the actual performance. So we took on this task several years ago. How do we demonstrate the deviation from the battery operator data and the nameplate data to actual performance? So he looked at ERCOT, which is a single balancing area. We look at 145 days of data from ERCOT. We looked at the average hourly output. This is settlement data for a battery plus wind, solar plus wind, and standalone battery. I said, oh my gosh, this is serious stuff. The nameplate and the battery operator's information is flawed. And we're evolving markets based upon that information. We got a major problem looming. We look at Texas, 20% of the power supply in Texas, or 20% of the energy resource in Texas, are solar and wind. Oh my gosh. Look at California. It's an equal challenge. So I'll stop there. You ask me the hard questions now, and I'll tell you what we've done.
Why don't you continue for a couple of
Okay?
I
So we-
challenged our speakers to tell us things we haven't heard before.
So we isolated the data, and we saw different performance characteristics. And we said, well, we can take this data, we can take the solar plus battery, create a pattern. We can take the wind plus battery, create a pattern, and standalone battery. Now, I will say this, that output would depend upon the location of those resources, obviously. The cell dynamics, there are a lot of issues that go into it. We said, we can now create a pattern and we can predict, we can create a forward curve that can say what that battery that's backing up a solar facility we can predict how it will perform and what the output will be. We can do the same thing with the wind plus battery and a standalone battery. Boy, that's helpful, David. And not only can we do that, we can use it for a day ahead market. We can look at a forward market in the, 6 months, a month, even up to 6 months. Predictive analytics. We can do that. So that's what we've been focusing on because we recognize the gap that we have and the challenge that we have in resource adequacy. We recognize you can't build any new facilities. The lead times are too long. You can build natural gas, but you ain't going to build it overnight. But a battery can build much quicker. And not only does the battery provide energy, now the battery can defer investments in distribution, which is critical. So we said, well, we think we got a really viable solution here that can help these markets that are evolving, that have a dominant participation of variable resources, that have market operators that are totally confused and don't know whether what is being said that's going to be provided in the market is actually going to be there. So what we're trying to do is say to folks, pay attention to what is happening in our markets. And unless we understand and are able to predict the performance of these batteries in the future and increase their availability, we're going to have a problem. So we believe we have a solution that's evolving in this area.
Can I
Yes, please.
two quick things? Is it working? There it is. Compliment David's comments with a couple of just clarifications to make sure that people don't walk away misinterpreting his wisdom. One is wind and solar do not need to be matched one-to-one with batteries. Don't take away that piece. You didn't mean to imply that. Resource adequacy is a system attribute, not a technology attribute. It's the second thing to say. The third thing is that I've certainly published a lot and happy to share it all with you, that the opportunity for batteries to provide all those services, the remuneration value, et cetera, is in the more advanced markets, both market design and variable generation markets than in the early ones. So there's a phased approach that we've worked with the IAA about over 6 phases of integrating renewables. This is most appropriate for, I'll call it 3, maybe 4 and beyond, not at the early stage. And so it's all a function of the subtleties of the markets. And those would be good things to just keep in the back of your mind. But everything else is absolutely spot on.
Thank you, and thank you.
Okay.
You have somehow gotten us back on track on the, I don't know how, but you've conveyed essential information really swiftly. And now we come to Paula Glover, who is you have 5 great acts to follow, but you are up to it, as we know. Paul is the president of the Alliance to Save Energy. I've had the honor of chairing her board, so I can tell you personally that she's a magnificent leader and fully up to the task at hand right now. Prior to being CEO of the Alliance, Paula was the CEO of AABE, which is the American Association of Blacks in Energy. And Paula also serves on the Keystone Policy Center board and also Billy Piser's board, Resources for the Future, another group near and dear to my heart. I have all my favorite organizations here today. And Paula, energy efficiency represents one of the greatest opportunities we have right now and it's so underappreciated, underinvested in. It's been called the first fuel, but it's not properly valued in terms of a reliability resource. So can you start there and then improve?
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for having me and for allowing me to go after Mr. Owens. Really, I'll get you back for that at some point. I've really enjoyed today's conversation. I think what I would want to leave this audience with is that, yes, we see an increase in demand. And so we talk a lot about supply and how do we increase supply by building things or whatever. What we have not talked about is how do we reduce demand. We assume that demand just is going to go up and there's nothing that we can do to increase demand now. And what I want to challenge is that thought, that demand response technology that is available today. We talked a little bit about smart meters earlier today. We could do that now in addition to the other things and really then prevent, I think, what Commissioner Chang was trying to allude to during lunch, which is stranded costs down the line because we're building things that we don't actually need right now. And so for us at the Alliance, we're really focused on how do we get our policymakers, our commissioners, and others to think about the opportunity that reducing demand provides for us in this moment. In 2023, we issued a report with DNV that was called Demand is the New Supply. And in that report, we found that you can unlock almost 200 gigawatts of capacity just with demand response technology. Now, that sounds easy, but it's really, really hard because what we're really talking about is aggregating a lot of different technologies so that they count to make one big number, right? And so it's not about just like getting all the big companies, right? But you want large organizations to do it, but it's how do you get every single house in a neighborhood, whether that's a low or moderate or even a wealthy neighborhood, right? How do you get every single school? How do you get to really be powerful, you need a lot of people, a lot of entities taking on demand response so that there's value. But that's the first challenge. But I would say the other challenge is that, right, it's also not valued in the same way as generation. And so part of the work that we're doing at the Alliance last 6 months, and we're going to continue on, right, is educating our regulators and challenging them to think about how do you value efficiency and demand response and give it an appropriate value to some other things that you are considering when you're thinking about, right, increasing capacity or building out a grid. Because we do believe that is equally as important, right? But different, but still an important tool that we can use today. And so there is that, right, there's that complication of just making sure that it's valued. The second complication, and we heard a lot about this last year when PJM stopped making capacity payments for efficiency and demand response, which is you have to be able to measure and verify that that technology is actually where it is, that it's working, that if the company needs to pull it back, they have the ability to do that. And so that's another question that we at the Alliance are working on and thinking about a special project to think about, okay, so how do you do measurement and verification? And is there an opportunity using blockchain to do that, right? Those of you who may be familiar with Block Power, which is Donald Byrd's company, he uses blockchain. That's the tool that he's using behind that organization. So we're thinking, hey, is there an opportunity to use blockchain at a higher level, right? So that we can kind of implement these technologies.
See that? That was no problem for you. And
Get any deeper.
can you talk to us about, in addition to having tremendous potential to reduce demand, it puts money back in people's pockets. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think efficiency puts money back in everybody's pockets, right? And so it's not, and I will start with, this is an interesting time that we're in. Earlier today, we were talking about affordability being one of the most important things that utility companies are faced with, right? Making sure that it's affordable for customers. We have spent as an association the last 7 months on the Hill talking with members about the importance of energy efficiency and affordability. We issued a white paper. And what we found out was that that was not a message that they cared about at all. And universally, what they told us is, no, we want to hear more about the commercial messaging. Tell us about the jobs that it's creating. Tell us what happens if these things go away. Tell us about opportunities in manufacturing. And so it's a little bit tricky, right? Because on the one hand, in the greater ether of public messaging, affordability, even for the administration, is number one. And yet, when you're walking the halls and talking about these issues in terms of affordability, they actually don't land in the same kind of way. But I think our challenge is that when these technologies are implemented, people's bills go down. But depending on what you're implementing and who's implementing, it's expensive. We call efficiency an investment, right? So you're not just, don't just buy a Nest and then think magically your bill goes down, because it's not just about the thermostat. There's a lot of other things that have to kind of, right? You don't want to just get yourself an Ecobee and then all of a sudden a 20% reduction. That's not actually how it works. And so really educating people about there's an investment that comes in, but there's a saving that's lifelong. It's long lasting. It's not a one-time savings, right? So if you're going to have a $20 reduction in your bill because you invested in energy efficiency, it's not a 1 month $20 reduction. It's a $20 reduction for the life of that. And so it creates a big opportunity for residentials, right? For people in apartments or homes, for whatever, to save money. But quite frankly, it creates a much bigger opportunity for businesses, especially small businesses, which tends to be the most challenging market. Think your 7-Elevens, think your mom and pop dry cleaners, and all of these businesses. And they benefit the most from the investment because that money that's saved can go back into their business. Hire more people, invest more operations, better infrastructure, whatever that is. And so we have this real push-pull. I'm asking you to spend money. You're going to see the savings over time. It's not going to be immediate, but I'm promising you that over time it's better for you. And so, our challenge in efficiency is to kind of weave all of those things together. And at the same time, get our policymakers and our regulators to see the value in what that is for the larger grid and to optimize that grid.
Would you believe that the tariffs will have any impact on appliance efficiency, new efficient appliances?
Yeah.
Because what I'm hearing, it will. So that's probably where the affordability issue that will become now a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I will say greater than that. We don't really know that Energy Star is going to stay forever, right? So if you no longer have Energy Star appliances, we don't really know what that's going to do. Tariffs is another issue.
Right.
If you think about passive efficiency, so I'm talking about insulation, windows, doors, that sort of thing. Certainly in the insulation community, many of their employees are immigrants. And so this immigration thing, H-1 visas, that's a huge impact for that sector of our business.
Right.
And so all of these things kind of together are going to impact us in different kinds of ways.
Thank you and thank you. There are two things I should mention. Three, actually. First of all, this panel's so good that you have rescued me from my inadequacy with respect to time management, and we're right back on track. Incredible. So we will be able to take a couple of questions. The two additional things I wanted to mention is that Emma Hand serves as the general counsel for the Alliance to Save Energy. And one of the people that has been the greatest ally, together with Paula and I, on energy efficiency will surprise you, and that is Tom Kuhn, who has served on the board and has really genuinely and sincerely helped us out.
Yeah.
Did you have a comment, Carl?
Did I take us off schedule?
No.
Just like real quickly, David talked about market design. I think the phrase has come up in a couple other references, and I'd just like to say two words about market design. Paul Joskow. If you care about market design, if you realize that most of the intellectual roots of our market designs are way back in the 80s with a very different generation mix, if you believe that our market designs really have to evolve seriously instead of just tweaking them and putting little band-aids on here, please read Paul Joskow, Professor Emeritus at MIT, who I think is the most concrete, reality-based economist on this and has some great ideas. So
I deposed him once. It was a challenging experience.